It is articles like these on why people do not trust A, the media, and B, doctors, and more specifically, quote unquote, psychologists. As we dive into the psychologist who claimed that the Idaho 4 murders were a psychosexual fantasy, even though there's no evidence of it. Zero, none, zilch. And as people who are quote unquote pro burgers all the time saying, oh, just use the facts, don't be using theories. That's all you have, you freedom hating SOBs. All you have are theories. Just because a guy with a badge and a guy that says, oh, I'm the prosecutor, I know what I'm doing. I've done this for 30 years, I know what I'm doing. Although I've never really been to trial. Yeah, that's who they're believing. The people who we at one time trusted with these things, like Nancy Grace and Trashley Banfield and brainless Brian Enton, all the people that we were supposed to trust. And then we look and we see that we go through the things, and what Nancy Disgrace is saying is something that is completely different than what we are actually reading. And it's like, wait a minute. This doesn't add up. And it is because of that complete and total willful incompetence. And at this point, it is willful incompetence, if not malicious. Absolutely malicious. And we're going to go through this psychologist, in which I don't know where he got his degree from, but he should probably get a refund. So this article is International Business Times UK. So, and we all know how the UK media is. They actually make the American media look good. And let me tell you, that is hard to do. And if you hear cars going by, my house is close to the road, so do your best to ignore it. Anyway, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe, like the video, put something in the comments. Just say hi. Say hi or give me a compliment. I haven't had one of those in a while. That'd be nice. But anyway, more importantly, let's dive in. So, Bryan Kohberger trial update. Psychologist claims Idaho 4 murders were psychosexual fantasy. Behind the statistics of 150 stab wounds lies a portrait of Bryan Kohberger as a man whose violent fantasy collided with real lives in Moscow's student house. Huh? Okay. Maybe we'll actually get some facts here, as our the residential Joker Cray Hughes so desperately craves, or so he claims. We all know he doesn't, but anyway. Bryan Kohberger, a former criminology student sentenced in Idaho to spend the rest of his life in prison for murdering 4 University of Idaho students in 2022, and is now being described by a forensic psychologist as having carried out a targeted psychosexual fantasy, killing in the victim's off-campus home in Moscow. What? Okay. Okay, we'll go on. The claim, based on newly released autopsy findings and other case evidence, was made by Dr. Gary Brucato, who has examined the case in light of his work on mass murder patterns. Okay. So let's see who this Dr. Gary Bricado is. Let's see. He is who earned his PhD. We're going to be when we get through the article, you'll see why that word earned is being used incredibly loosely. His PhD at the New School for Social Research in New York City. What is that? What the hell is that? Whatever. Those autopsy reports and Bricado's interpretation of them offered one of the most detailed attempts yet to explain why Kohberger attacked the house in the early hours of the 13th of November, 2022, and what might have been been happening in his mind as he stabbed 4 young people more than 150 times. And this was all in 90 seconds, according to the police reports. He has done as quickly as 90 seconds. So let's see. Yeah, legal outcome, 4 consecutive life sentences, yada yada yada. Bryan Kohberger and the targeted psychosexual fantasy. On the surface, the outline of the crime is grim but straightforward. Okay, so there are many things to describe this case. Straightforward is not one of them. Not by a long shot. In the early hours of November 13th, Maddison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle were killed inside their shared rental home in the small college town of Moscow, Idaho. Investigators later concluded that all but Kernodle were likely asleep or in bed when Kohberger attacked, which is false. Which is absolutely false. Now, remember, this was written up on February 25th, 2026. This year, 2 weeks ago, this was written up. And they are still going with the lie. We know they weren't in bed. We know they weren't sleeping. The brutality only becomes fully visible in the autopsy numbers. Collectively, the 4 students were stabbed more than 150 times. Kernodle alone suffered more than 67 wounds. Now, a good journalist, and this is where I my expertise come into play, because I went to college for stuff like this. You would put mostly defensive wounds, but they didn't do that. That would kind of ruin the narrative there. But anyway, Goncalves was believed to have been stabbed nearly 40 times. According to the report obtained by ABC 7 News, that she had been stabbed so many times that her facial structure was extremely damaged. It wasn't from the stabbing. My God, if you're going to write an article and put it online, at least look it up. At least look it up. There were 2 weapons in this. There is more than enough reason to believe there's 2 weapons in this. And the additional injuries connected with asphyxiation and blunt force trauma. So, the pattern beyond rage killing. For Bricado, who helped create the Columbia University Mass Murder Database, which, after reading this article, I kind of question its validity, because if this moron decided to help, he probably did it wrong. And as the great words of Senator John Kennedy, you don't make the same a guy like this Gary Bricado, he doesn't make the same mistake twice. He makes it 4 or 5 times just to make sure he's got it right. The pattern, how, but anyway, the pattern suggests something far beyond a simple rage killing. Speaking to the Daily Mail, and this is how insane this is. You go to look at the original article from the Daily Mail. This is insane. And it's behind a paywall. Got to get it behind that paywall. Because, you know, you can't, you got to be able to profit off death. Just ask Steve Goncalves. But anyway, speaking to the Daily Mail, he argued that the evidence pointed to a targeted psychosexual fantasy probably aimed at one individual in the house, which is patently insane. There would be a trail. There would be signs. There isn't even a digital footprint of this. There is nothing. In his view, Kohberger, now this is in view of this wackadoo doctor, Kohberger did not go there to kill 4 people. Well, yeah, he didn't go there, period. If you actually looked at the documents, look at the police reports, just look at the damn case. Start from the beginning and then go from there. Let's see where your true and honest conclusion comes to. Because I can tell you, if you actually went with this case from start to finish, which this doctor, who, quite frankly, should be stripped of his license because of how stupid he is. This dude went from back to front, and on my other YouTube channels, you know, I always talk about how you go from back to the front, especially when talking about racing and setting up strategies and stuff like that. But in true crime, you start from the front. You start at the beginning, and then you work your way through, and you follow what the evidence says. That it is simple crime solving 101. And obviously, in this case, there was none of that from MPD, ISP, or the FBI. It quickly became, okay, how do we get this to Kohberger? As soon as the name came down, how do we get this to Kohberger? But anyway, his intel failed him, Bricado said. What do you mean his intel failed him? It doesn't take this is, they are contradicting themselves right off the cuff here. If you want to believe this doctor, because having this psychosexual fantasy thing would have required Kohberger to be stalking them, which we know is not the case. There's no evidence to prove it. And quite frankly, there's zero evidence to prove that he even knew they existed before this. There's nothing. And yet, here we are with this Dr. Bricado and his stupid theory. Your intel would tell you that there are multiple people in this house essentially at all times. Whether it be the 5 people that live there, whether it be Ethan, whether it be during a party, and it's not going to take a rocket scientist or a international super spy to know that last football game of the year, that's at home, last home game of the year, it is a known party house, and people like friends are there all the time. So there is nothing to suggest that whoever went into that house would assume that there's only one person there. There's nothing that suggests that. And then you pile on top of that the DoorDash that got there at 4 a.m. ish. Well, yeah, all the lights go on. And you would see that, yeah, someone's eating food. So not only in this particular theory, in this theory, you not only have you're not only in the assumption that Maddie is home, but now you know there is at least somebody else there. And then when you look at the driveway, there are 5 freaking cars in the driveway. There are 5 of them. So you know there's at least 5 people there. It's simple math. Like, so again, this theory does not make any sense on just a common sense standpoint. Now, if you want to dive into his realm of psychology and actually look at Bryan Kohberger, there isn't a sexual element to him. With all of his mental issues that he has, his interest in girls would at the very minimum wouldn't rise to this particular level to want to play out a fantasy with a random stranger in a house that he's never been in before. I mean, his self-esteem would not be high enough to go and do such a bold action. I mean, come on now. I am a redneck in the sticks, and I know this stuff. And you're telling me a guy who has spent years studying the human brain, and especially in the mind of quote unquote monsters, you're telling me you're not picking up on that? Yeah. I tell you what, this Bricado guy, he better hope the dumbest person on the planet doesn't end up dying, or else he'll be the dumbest person on the planet. But anyway, let's continue on with Bricado's weird sexual fantasy that he has. His intel failed him, suggesting that Kohberger's planning was detailed but flawed. When the plan collided with the messy reality of a shared student house, the psychologist believes that the fantasy fractured and the body count soared. Okay, so again, this still doesn't make sense because he left a living witness. If you want to go with this theory, it still doesn't make sense. Because when the fantasy is broken and you go into a blind rage, you are going to kill anything that moves. If you are going with this theory. And obviously, according to Dylan, the killer looked Dylan in the eyes. They had a little staring contest. So again, this does not make sense. I mean, my God. He overestimated himself and underestimated women. Oh, and now we're back to the incel theory again, which again would not have made sense. Those the whole want to play out some kind of sexual fantasy and being an incel does not match. For God's sake, dude. I swear to God, this dude got his PhD on the back of a cereal box. Like, oh my God. In one of the more cutting lines of his assessment, noting nothing in Bricato's reading has been presented in court as formal evidence about motive, and there is no independent confirmation of his theory in the official documents so far released. They don't have a motive. Read the docs. Read the docs. They can't even put Bryan Kohberger in the area. And if you want to actually look into this case, you have more than enough reason to believe that it started somewhere around 2:37 when the first scream is heard on a camera. At 2:37. So it at least started then. And it could have started earlier. It could have started the moment Kaylee and Maddie walked into those doors. We don't know. His conclusions, however, are grounded in the autopsy data and the known layout of the house, not in pure speculation. Well, no, speculation would be an educated guess, and obviously this isn't an educated guess. This is just, let's throw this at the wall and see if it sticks. They should still be taken with a grain of salt unless the investigators endorse them. So who was the target in the Idaho 4 murders? Ever since Kohberger's arrest, true crime forums and commenters have argued over who, if anyone, he fixated on before the murders. Well, again, you have to get the actual killer to figure out who the actual target is. So this is all for naught. But let's play along, because this guy should absolutely be stripped of any sort of medical license. Some have theorized that Kaylee Goncalves was the intended victim because she had the second highest number of stab wounds, and the suffered catastrophic facial injuries. Ricardo does not agree. Of course he doesn't. Because Kaylee would be the reasonable target. Xana would be a reasonable target as far as making things make sense. Maddie, not so much. He believes Maddison Mogen was the central target of Kohberger's psychosexual fantasy. One detail has become crucial to that theory. Ooh. What detail? What detail? What detail did this dude conjure up to make this theory that I've already torn apart already? What's the crucial detail? On the night of the killings, Goncalves decided to share a single bed with Mogen. Two friends, it was an ordinary, almost cozy choice at the end of the night. To Bricado, it was the twist that ruined Kohberger's plan. Okay, so we don't even know if they were snuggling up into bed together, which, with the size of that bed, not likely. Very unlikely. To the point of it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't. I mean, Granted, Maddie is a lot is a tiny girl, but again, it's not a very big bed. If they were in reality, if they were going to share a bed, they would have gone off to Kaylee's room. It's a bigger room. There's more space. And on top of that, there was allegedly a dog in the house, which I'm beginning to question that one. And also, if they were asleep, if you want to go with this theory, Kohberger was asleep, or the girls were asleep. Kohberger goes in there and sees that there are two people in that bed. He would have turned around and walked away. So, again, that does not make sense. And again, this is a psychologist, somebody who has a PhD. And quite frankly, it's not worth the paper it's written on. And like I said at the top of this thing, this is the reason nobody trusts the media. This is why nobody trusts doctors. And this is especially why nobody trusts psychologists. On top of all the other stuff that has gone on outside of true crime. So, and on top of that, if this was supposedly going from an attempt to have a fantasy with one person to an escalation that reached to 4 people, the killer wouldn't have gotten out as clean as he did, leaving just touch DNA on the knife sheath, which looks to be planted because the picture where it was taken, the picture of it was taken, it was on the outside of Maddie. It wasn't between the girls. It looks planted. So I have reason to believe that the knife sheath was planted. There was no touch DNA on the knife sheath. And that they literally pulled a DNA sample out of God knows where and just said that they matched it to Kohberger. And again, yeah, the profound insecurities and destroyed faces. And and I'm gonna say that I'm gonna guess that he makes the case that, oh, his rage was towards Kaylee because she ruined the moment. And again, no, that's not how that would work. He wouldn't go into a blind rage and start just beating the holy hell out of Kaylee. If he opened up the door to Maddie's bedroom and saw 2 girls laying in that bed, he would have either A, shifted the fantasy, or B, closed the door, turned around, and walked out. That's what he would have done. He wouldn't have gone into a blind rage. Because again, if you want to believe this, then this guy has been in this house enough times to know exactly what room it is, exactly where to go, and how to get through the house quietly. That's the big word. That's the big thing. Quietly. Because any person who went into the house that first time, Dylan would have heard the footsteps going up the stairs the first time. And I'm not defending Dylan by any stretch of the imagination, and don't mistake me on that. But hearing somebody going up the stairs, it wouldn't have alarmed Dylan. Now, there's somebody in the house, and then having a staring contest with a masked man. Yeah, absolutely. That'd be a cause to pause. But that would have been after Kaylee and Maddie and before and Ethan, according to this fairy tale that this idiot doctor decided to drum up. So, yeah, it's oh Jesus. And for the families of Maddison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle, that life sentence locks Kohberger away, but does little to clarify the why. Well, that's when, if there was actually any leverage on Kohberger, then Bill Thompson would have said, "Hey, you got to talk about how you did this if you want the death penalty off the table." But that's the problem. Bill Thompson didn't have any leverage because he has nothing. He can't place him at the scene. The cell phone data does not place him at the scene. The touch DNA is transferable, therefore not placing him at the scene. Dylan was unable to identify him, not able to place him at the scene. There is nothing that places Kohberger at the scene of the crime. And again, if you go off the 237 initial scream as to when it started, and I think it started a little bit before that, that places Kohberger using that exact same phone data at his home in Pullman. He wasn't even in the state. So, nice try, doctor. I hope you lose your license because you are a freaking moron and shouldn't be anywhere near psychology. I'm Dylan Hildreth. This is Hildreth Investigates. We'll see you in the next one.